Hi. Hi. My name's Deborah Green. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies. I'm also the director of the Judaic Studies program at the University of Oregon now. My primary area of interest is both in Hebrew Bible and in early rabbinics. And you can ask me later all about that if you'd like to. To give you some self-disclosure, I was raised in Los Angeles, California, in what's known as a conservative egalitarian synagogue. So my family is Jewish. Both my parents are Jewish. I have one sister. She lives in Northern California. I'm married to somebody who's Jewish, and our son is 5 years old. He's also Jewish. I was picked as the person in religious studies. I'm the token Jew. I'm here to talk to you today about Judaism. And while Rabbi Yitzhak Husband-Hankins is coming, I think he's coming next week, is that right? So he'll be here next week to talk to you probably much more eloquently than I can about Judaism and Jews in various communities and in the kinds of settings that you may encounter them. My experience is not only academic in the teaching of Judaism, where we try and be much more objective than people in communities, right? I always wear this sort of double face, right? Because I am Jewish, and I probably agree with some of the teachings in Judaism, but I also study Judaism, so I'm always holding it at arm's length and sort of looking at it from an outsider. In the early 1980s, I was living in Orange County, and then I also lived in Los Angeles for a time, and became involved with groups of people who were recovering alcoholics, recovering addicts. It was at a time of sort of cocaine crisis, I would say, in the country, where I saw things change over from addictions of people snorting and shooting to smoking crack, and then moving on to other substances. And why is that important? Well, I guess because in part to me, that was a place where I could see that recovery and religion were extremely intertwined. And I could see within the Jewish community sort of some new things happening that I hadn't seen before, and how that translated into the people who were trying to help people in that community. So I'm happy and willing and ready to talk to you about that today, and how you may encounter that leftover from the 80s, and where sort of I see, as somebody standing back who now studies religions, which I didn't at the time in the 80s, where I think that's going in terms of interfacing in human services with people of the kinds of religions that Judaism is. But before I get started today, and since I gave you this sort of weird reading that had nothing to do with spirituality and everything to do with calendar and holidays and observances and all kinds of things that don't follow what Dan Close said we were going to look at in this class in terms of spirituality, I want to give you a scenario. Let's say, for instance, you're working at some local social service agency. It's a very hot day. It's the middle of summer, and all of a sudden a family comes to you, maybe with parents who are, maybe they're my age, they're in their, okay, I'm going to be 50, but let's say they're in their 40s, they're a bit younger than me. They have a teenage son who clearly is very angry with them. They are dressed very conservatively. The woman is wearing clothes that go right down to her wrists, and she's wearing a long dress. Her knees are covered. Her hair is covered. She might be wearing a hat. You're not sure, but it looks like she might be wearing a wig. The father seems to be wearing a black hat. He's wearing a black suit jacket, and it's like 90 degrees outside. And here you are sitting in your office. I don't know how you're dressed. You can think about that. and tell me, what do you do? What do you do? How do you get to know these people? How do you welcome them into your cubicle area?
First of all, it's good to know who they are, and this is very important. That's why we have this class. So if you know their religion, so we get to respect them.
So you know that their names are Mr. and Mrs. Greenstein, and their son's name is Jonah. That's as much as you know.
Okay, I just love them. So, you know, when people come in your office, you forget how they look, how they dress. You do your job to provide the care for them.
Okay, so what do you say to them? How do you greet them into your office?
Oh my goodness, I don't know.
Anyone else? Do you stand? Do you stay sitting?
Where I am for my site, I would most likely be going into the lobby area to get them, and I would probably, I don't tend to shake people's hands, so I don't do that, but I would probably, as politely as I could, hi, my name's Bree, I'm so happy that you guys are here today. Why don't you come back into my office? But I wouldn't necessarily change what I'm saying because of my observations. I have a very generic way that I would talk to my clients.
And how many chairs are in your office?
Where we would take them is a conference room that would have a long table with maybe tons of chairs. So there's plenty of them to choose from. If I took them into the conference room, I would try to sit across from them so we could have eye contact, or at least somewhere where I could have eye contact with them. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else currently interning somewhere or working somewhere?
I would probably do the same thing, actually. Where I'm at, I work at a school, and most often they actually come to your office. You don't have to go and introduce yourself. So I probably would stand first. I definitely shake hands and make eye contact. I guess I follow also their lead. So if I can see that they're not making eye contact, I probably would just shake their hand and invite them to sit down, and then I would sit down, usually across the table from each other.
Okay. So, sounds great. I think it's wonderful. Couple of things you should know. Very religious Jews often practice what we call shomer nagia or shomeret nagia, and they don't touch people of the opposite sex. So you would stretch out your hand to shake hands with the father or with the son, and if they're with it and they're nice and they're polite, they very politely say, I don't shake hands, or they may definitely put their hands behind their back, and then you would know just to move on, right? And same thing with the woman. If you stood to shake her hand and you were a male, she might just stand back from you and not shake with you. But so many religious Jews practice this, and they may or may not be dressed in this sort of Hasidic dress of very dark colors, very heavy colors. Sometimes people can dress in deceptively very modern and hip clothes, but they're still ultra-Orthodox. And sometimes they can be not nice about it, right? Where they kind of expected that you were supposed to know that. And how could you possibly have known that? And that's actually happened to, it happens to lots of Jews all the time, right? Because most Jews in the United States are not ultra-Orthodox, right? But then you run up against this. And so when it happens, it can be very uncomfortable. Well, same thing. Places where I've noticed where there's real problems in interacting with people in the social services happen in especially the areas of recovery, where so much nowadays, and even before the 80s, many Alcoholics Anonymous meetings take place in churches. It's not a place where Jews who are religious, even Jews who aren't very religious, feel really comfortable. And it's very hard to get an alcoholic to agree to go to meetings to begin with. If any of you have tried doing it, it's even harder to get addicts to admit that they're addicts and get them to go. So that's one barrier. That's one stumbling block. So what happens in social services? Well, if there's someplace other than a church, that can be great. But if you know it as the people are walking in the door, if you know it before you go to help them, if you can think that through and think of a way to have a dialogue about that, all the better for you. How can I help you do that? I'm not sure, because I don't have the background that you have. But it's something to consider as you move forward. Same thing with what actually happens in recovery programs. Regularly in AA and NA and in CA, people say the Lord's Prayer. And you can say, well, wait a minute, the Lord's Prayer comes right out of the Hebrew Scriptures. But it's strongly identified as a Christian prayer. And there are many Jews who really start to feel themselves separate from the program at that point. And so that can be very difficult for them. So these are all things, I mean, can you know all things? No. Is the idea, yes, just to love somebody through it and be able to offer that kindness and support to sort of learn the way? Yes, but if I can give you some tips on things that might be coming down the pike, that might really help you. Jews have a history of interaction with Christianity over the last 2,000 years that has been less than positive. Jews associate a Christian hegemon, a Christian power structure, that they live in Christian societies and that they have learned to go along and get along, that the laws of the land obviously apply to them. But the United States is essentially, from Jewish eyes, and I would argue probably from Muslim eyes, although you're going to have somebody who knows a lot more than I do talk about that, really a Christian country. I mean, it doesn't have an official, priesthood or anything like that, but certainly Christmas is a national holiday, and most Jews over the last several generations have seen their children, generation after generation, become much more Christianized. Hanukkah, which happens at a holiday at the same time as Christmas, was not a gift-giving holiday. Purim was the big gift-giving holiday in Judaism, and I don't know if you can find a Jewish kid around who doesn't get presents now on Hanukkah, but they all do essentially, because Jews tend to adopt those customs of whatever land they're living in. In fact, at Hanukkah, there's a whole host of traditions that come from Europe, from that same holiday season. And the reason for that is because lots of Jews lived in Europe for a really long time. But by and large, this country celebrates the main Christian holidays, as sort of national holidays. When you go to a grocery store around the time of Passover, you'll find in the city of Eugene the end of an aisle, or maybe halfway of an aisle, with Passover foods. And as you read in your readings, Jews eat totally different foods on Passover. You can't eat, are you asking me a question or you're just listening? Okay, so you can't eat a lot of the regular foods, so you eat all these different foods. Well, guess what? You can find aisle after aisle after aisle of Easter candy, bunnies made like Easter candy, Easter baskets, right? You go to the card aisle. You think you find any Passover cards? No! Easter cards, everything having to do with spring is read onto Easter. Now, why? Well, of course, because there's many, many more Christians in this country. So you can imagine that starting to look at things through the eyes of somebody who's Jewish, somebody who's Muslim, somebody who's Hindu, as we have a lot of different religions in this country, but they're really not all represented equally, and that's just life. And most people live in this country and they do great. It's an extremely pluralistic country. It's a wonderful place to live, right? It's been one of the few safe places for Jews in history, right? In almost every country that Jews have lived in, they've experienced either segregation or violence on themselves, or out and out, Holocaust, right? The rounding up of Jews and the killing of Jews systematically, expulsion. But the United States is a place that has not treated Jews like that. And like other immigrant groups in the United States, like the Irish, like Germans, like others, Jews too have had their problems in the United States, but certainly nothing like they experienced in Eastern Europe or other places. And Jews, of course, today also have Israel, right? And they heavily identify with Israel. They heavily identify with it because it is the place that must take them in if things get bad. If things don't go well in the United States, and it looks like another Holocaust were to happen in the world, in a place like the United States, I know that I could go to Israel. Israel would have to open its doors to me, and I could live there. So it makes for a special connection with that country. Wait, I think we have one before you. Yeah.
I'm wondering if the Jewish tendency to adopt the cultural traditions around them is kind of inherent in the religion, or if it's a coping mechanism that they've had to develop through all the years of exile. And would you thought about that?
I don't know. I mean, Judaism has always been, as any religion that survives, is a growing and changing religion. So I think it does both. I think it just adopts those things as it moves forward, and there's coping mechanisms. Reform and conservative Jews today don't really have any issues with, same-sex partnerships. Orthodox, it's another story, right? Because right out of the Bible, men who sleep with men, that's an abomination, right? So they haven't changed that. They've adopted that. Reform and conservative Jews, not an issue. So is that a coping mechanism? I don't think so. I think that's a way of just moving forward. But, the spinning top, the dreidel that's used at Hanukkah, was that a coping mechanism, or is it just that kids started playing it because they lived in a country where kids play to spin it with a spinning top, and then it gets adopted, and brought into, the entire game gets brought into, the holiday, I think is a matter of course. I think it was just, it just happens.
Yeah, and excuse my language, I don't think coping mechanism is the correct term.
I think that's a good term.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Survival or acculturation might be
No, I think that's a great term, because I think that because acculturation has different motivations, but coping mechanism says, either you're not really going to survive, without that, without adopting those things, or you adopt it just by nature of, hey, you like it. So you just adopt it. I mean, you see that even happening with lights today, and you'll find people all over the, hemisphere on this, even within the synagogue, the local synagogue here at Temple Beth Israel. There are people who say, Hanukkah lights? No, those are Christmas lights, bad thing. Other people are like, they're lights, they're nice, and this is the festival of lights. Why shouldn't I put up lights? So, do I think Hanukkah has any chance of going away? No. Do I give my kid gifts at Hanukkah? You betcha. Sorry, go.
Have you been in Israel?
Have I been to Israel? Yes, I was in Israel several times, and then I lived there for a year during the Second Intifada when I was doing graduate work.
So how is Hanukkah celebrated versus Christmas?
Great question. And really, that was one of the things I really enjoyed the most about living in Israel for a year, so that I could see the difference when you have a power structure, right, a country's power structure that is not Christian, right? So Hanukkah, the way Hanukkah is celebrated in Israel, first of all, I was in Jerusalem. There's a lot of very Orthodox, very religious people in Jerusalem, and I lived on a street that began one of those sort of closed off sections. So the families on that street have very large menorahs, the candelabra that's lit at Hanukkah, and they're very, very large, and they take very large candles, and they light them outside. They have, on their stoop of their steps, or usually you'll have some kind of brick or cement structure. Everything in Jerusalem is built from Jerusalem stone, that beautiful stone that you see at the Wailing Wall. If you've seen pictures of that wall in the Old City, well, everything in Jerusalem, it's like a city mandate. It has to be built from that stone. So people will have sort of fences, those brick walls that are made out of that stone in front of their houses, and they'll put their menorah on it, and then they have a very big glass box that they fit over it. And there aren't a lot of street lights. And so literally it's the Festival of Lights. The entire street is essentially candlelit. So it's very beautiful. But, do people give gifts? No. Do you know when Christmas happens? Only if you go to Bethlehem. Only if you go to the Old City. Only if you go somewhere where there's Christians. And there's a lot of Christians in Jerusalem, but you have to hunt out a celebration. And until you've celebrated Christmas in Bethlehem, I'm sorry, you just haven't celebrated it. So it's really amazing. It's really quite something. So, but you can see, real differences. On the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur, the streets in Jerusalem, completely quiet. No cars. No cars at all. You'll see people walking to the synagogue or to wherever they're going to, and they fast, they're not eating, no stores are open, nothing is open, nothing happens. And when people walk, they're dressed completely in white. As a sign of purity. You're purifying your soul. It makes you think about it, and they walk right in the middle of the street because there are no cars, no buses, no nothing. So it's the one time where in the middle of a bustling city, you could hear a pin drop. It's quite something. Other questions? I'm trying not to do formal lecture, but just answer your questions about the reading, other questions you have, and we'll get to a lecture at some point. Go ahead. No, you were first.
Okay, so you mentioned fasting, and in Catholicism, children don't have to fast up until I think it's 9. Mm-hmm. So is there an age where children don't have to fast?
In Judaism, for all of the fast days, children certainly don't fast until they're 13, until they've gone through Bat or Bar Mitzvah. And people who are ill or who could get ill from fasting itself, they don't fast. Fasting's not a requirement.
Okay, one question off that. Do pregnant women fast? No.
No. I would think that would be on the advice of your doctor, yeah. But I don't know any pregnant women. I was pregnant. I can't imagine trying to fast. Yeah. What the Orthodox do is another thing. I don't know. But
my other question was, do you have a theory or an answer to why throughout history it seems like the Jewish faith has been prosecuted so much?
Persecuted?
Persecuted, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want to share it, or is that not what?
Jews didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. Their understanding at the time of the Messiah, really everyone's understanding who was Jewish at the time, was that the Messiah would be king and would rule. And so it's possible that there were probably people who were followers of Jesus, and at the time that he died on the cross, that was kind of it for them. They were like, oops, mistake. So I do, and I think that as Christianity got rolling and was able to convert Romans, and the Roman government essentially becomes Christian, by having Jews around, it's sort of a proof and reminder every day that not everybody agrees with you, and that you have this significant group in your polis who says, no, you're advocating getting rid of this covenant. The covenant is everything. The fact that Sinai happened and God gave these laws, you can't supersede those laws. No Messiah supersedes all those laws. They just didn't disagree. And every day that goes by that you have a group of people thriving who say, we're the chosen people, you're not the chosen people, we're the real Israel. Whatever Paul told you was wrong in that letter, right, where he says, essentially this new group is the real Israel and people who follow the law aren't, and the Jews keep saying, no, we're not, and we have this special connection, and we're the originals, you're the ones that veered off. I think that gets to be a problem. And I think that very, very quickly, we know that as we move into a Byzantine hegemon, as we move from a Roman rule that is not Christian to a rule that is Christian in Rome, as Rome becomes Christianized, very quickly they start passing laws against Jews, very, very quickly. And, I think over time, that's going to get worse and worse and worse. And there are misunderstandings and other things that happen. But, I could give you a different example of how each one of those things gets going, but I think that...
Okay, so I don't identify, I was never brought up religious or anything like that. So, what I know about religion is, what I watch on, the History Channel and from friends and things like that. So, so Jesus was a Jew, but he started the Christian faith.
No,
he
didn't.
Okay, so Jesus was a Jew. I don't get it.
I don't want to get into a whole thing on early Christianity. We can have Stephen Shoemaker come here and talk to you. And Daniel Falk will probably cover a lot of this for you, I think, in a couple of weeks. But essentially, Jesus is Jewish, and he's out preaching, and he ends up dying. And whether he actually believes that he's the Messiah or just others believe that he's the Messiah is hard to know. I think in Mark's gospel it's hard to know. In the other gospels it's a little bit clearer. But he dies, and at that moment, people who are followers of him, his brother and Peter and the others who are living in Jerusalem, are clearly still Jews. They're essentially meeting at the temple. They still keep all the laws of kashrut. They still keep all the food laws. And at that time, Paul, who is from Tarsus, has a conversion experience. He becomes a follower and believer. He says himself that he was sort of on this manhunt to hunt Jesus down at one time, but now is converted himself to believing in Jesus. So he's not converted to Christianity. There is no Christianity. They're all Jews. Paul's Jewish. And Paul goes out and he believes that Jesus is coming back very, very soon. And I think under that pressure that he feels, that people will not be saved unless they are believers at the time that Jesus returns, Paul goes out and starts a mission of convincing people. Now, in Acts, it's related that Paul is going to, Jewish congregations and doing this, that, and the other and converting Jews. But from Paul's letters, of the letters that we consider to actually be Paul's, he actually seems not to be going to Jews. He actually seems to show up in towns, and most of the people that he's converting to this belief are Romans, people who have all sorts of different religions. Rome doesn't have a single religion that's called paganism. Paganism is a very derogatory term for people who usually have religions where there's multiple gods. But those religions can be extremely sophisticated. But Paul is converting people to this belief, and in essence, he's converting them to be Jewish to some degree. And it's not until I think these guys come from Jerusalem, until Peter comes and visits, and until Paul is called back to Jerusalem, that there's any problem, really. Then I think the guys in Jerusalem start to understand, they're not keeping laws of kashrut. They're not eating these different foods, or staying away from certain kinds of foods. They're eating whatever they want. They're not circumcised. The men aren't circumcised. And at that point, there's going to be a rift. There's going to be a rift. Judaism can tolerate a lot of different forms, but circumcision and keeping that covenant, and that covenant includes those laws regarding food, there's no getting around those. So as Christianity moves forward and the covenant is superseded, the Hebrew Bible is superseded with a New Testament. Now you have a New Testament and an Old Testament. Judaism's not going to see that as the same religion anymore. They're not going to see that as a part of their own. And then it comes down to sort of, in a spiritual sense, has the Messiah arrived? Well, no, in the estimation of Jews, not. Jesus died on the cross. There's many Jews who believe that Bar Kokhba, during the Bar Kokhba revolt, was another Messiah. There's evidence that maybe, possible evidence, that some rabbis thought that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. Well, guess what? Bar Kokhba died. He's not the Messiah.
So Jesus, the Son of God for Christianity, is that for Christians what a Messiah is then?
Jesus is the Messiah.
Jesus is the Messiah.
Jews define Messiah slightly differently. At the time, probably most people, Son of God is a term that comes out of the Hebrew Bible, which isn't the paramount term of what makes somebody, the Messiah. And Judaism goes through a long tradition of evolution surrounding those ideas. One stop along the way happens to be you could take a photograph at that place where we're at when Jesus lives and dies, right? But that continues. And in fact, I would argue that the idea of Messiah continues to evolve, not just in Christianity and in Judaism, but in other religions as well. There's many Jews today who aren't awaiting a Messiah that's a human. There's many Jews today who would take that term Mashiach and use it as a verb, not to mean anointed, which is literally what it means in the Bible, the anointed one. And the only people anointed like that with that term Mashiach in the Bible are kings and kings of Israel and Judah and the high priest. So those are the only ones who are anointed with that term Mashiach. Hang on one sec. But there are many Jews today who believe that Messiah is really a period of time in which there will be peace on earth and in which there will be no more war and there will be no more strife. In essence, that period of time that we read about when the lion will lay down with the lamb. And Jews today, especially liberal Jews who are modern Orthodox, who are conservative, who are Reformed Jews, have a very strong belief that it is their job to make that happen in their lifetime. That my job to my son is to make that period of time, to make peace on earth happen today, as soon as I can. And so you will see Jews very fervently working to bring about peace.
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, I want to follow up for what she said about the persecution of the Jews. You mentioned the Christianity as one of them. What about Islam? We are asking you tough questions.
Yeah. No, Islam, from the perspective of Islam itself, right, Islam itself sort of took a stance of Jews and Christians sort of being like second-class citizens. Now, that's not in the words of a Muslim, that's in the words of a Jew, sort of looking back on the history of it. But essentially, Muhammad came to the Jews and thought, like many others, that of course they would buy into Islam. Why not? It makes so much sense, right? And of course that was going to happen. And when the Jews said, no, it's about covenant for us, and it's not about these other things, you're welcome to join us, but we're not interested. I think at that time, Muhammad kind of thought that they were, sort of lost at that point. He certainly did not react the way Martin Luther was going to react. When Martin Luther presented the Jews sort of with the same thing of, well, of course this is the answer. Why wouldn't you grab onto this? And you might want to say that Jews are stiff-necked people. But in addition to that, in the early stages of Islam, the Jews also sided with the wrong sides when it came to sort of the economic and political structures that were happening. So that was always going to be an issue, but Jews lived as, I would say, second-class citizens in Islamic countries for many, many years, and we have, this tradition of Spain and Al-Andalus in the medieval period where Judaism and Christianity and Islam just thrive, but particularly Judaism and Islam together, where these people are in deep philosophical discussion. They're sharing a lot of spiritual ideas. Jewish mysticism owes an enormous amount to Islam in its thinking and in its practice. So I think that there's a very deep connection there. What sort of got things to be really problematic was the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. And once Israel goes to war, or it doesn't go to war, once it gets attacked by all of the surrounding countries, it's essentially fighting, these European immigrants, right, against these Arabs. And I don't think that started out as necessarily a religious conflict. It really started out, I think, as a political conflict. But lo and behold, Israel succeeds. And those people aren't thrown into the sea. And now you've got the first refugee problem, right? You've got all these people who fled, in some cases were forced out, right, and are now living sort of in the surrounding areas, and those countries have to absorb them. In response to that, what most of the Arab countries did, or I should say the Muslim countries, those countries that had, a lot of Muslims and by and large were Arab, they threw their Jews out, their Jews who had been there for thousands of years. They threw them out, and those people had nowhere to come, and Israel had to absorb them and, had to take in all of its own refugees. The only country that I know of that didn't do that, and this happened in successive years, very soon after 48, 50, 51, 52, was Tunisia. And Tunisia has only had one, I think, bad instance of very serious threat against its Jewish community. Most of its Jews don't live in Tunis now. There's a very old Jewish community in Tunis. Most of them don't actually live there. They live on an island. But they are the only Jews I know that were protected in some way, or at least not kicked out. But it was pretty serious. I mean, there's plenty of Jews living in Israel today who had no desire to come to Israel. They came there because they had to.
Yeah, my last question was, when I lived in Michigan, there was a movement they called Messianic Jews.
And we have Messianic Jews.
Can you explain me a little bit that?
We have Messianic Jews also in Eugene. In fact, we used to have 3 congregations of Messianic Jews. And all 3 of the leaders of those congregations actually took my biblical Hebrew class, so I actually learned quite a bit. There's different Messianic Jewish groups, but by and large, most of the people who term themselves Messianic Jews are people who are either Jewish by birth, but believe in Jesus as the Messiah, or they are people who are Christians who have come to call themselves Messianic Jews, that's the closest identification that they feel. And most of them celebrate some Christian holidays. They celebrate Jewish holidays. They read from the Torah, the scrolls that are in the synagogue. They often wear talit during their prayer, which is a prayer shawl. And they may or may not celebrate the Sabbath on the same days, and they may or may not celebrate the holidays exactly the same, but they celebrate the Jewish holidays. Many of them actually keep kosher. Many of them come to synagogue sometimes, but they definitely believe in Jesus as the Messiah. And they believe that to me, their practices resemble Jewish Christians, the early Jewish Christians, right? I mean, that's kind of how I see it. Although I don't think they realize this, but their practices of Jewish holidays are extremely rabbinic, but they're not aware of that, and only I am because I study rabbinics, and so I know what those holidays look like now and what the rabbis did to influence them, so that's a little bit different. They should be distinguished from Jews for Jesus. Jews for Jesus, at least those I've met, and there were lots of them in Orange County, California, Jews for Jesus are usually people who are Jewish, born Jewish, but go to churches. They go to churches and they identify really as Christians in the sense that they don't celebrate Jewish holidays. They aren't engaged with Hebrew or the study of Jewish texts. They're Christian essentially, but they believe in Jesus. So that. And I look forward to seeing all of you in my biblical Hebrew class next year. Yeah.
Could you describe it? I have kind of a convoluted question, so let me explain a little bit. I guess the overarching question is the Jewish covenant, just and what that means. And then specific to that, I have very limited knowledge about just Jewish history and in particular the Jewish covenant, but also what I do know is that there's this or I guess not know isn't the right word, but I'm aware of some sort of tension about the covenant, between the covenant and then modern, what used to be sacrifices, and that the temple no longer is there to have the sacrifices available to uphold part of the covenant. So I guess, could you describe what the covenant is, and then also kind of how that plays into modern Jewish, the modern Jewish religion,
Right.
or how it's practiced?
So the covenant, when we talk about the covenant, we're talking about the event that happens at Sinai in Exodus. So, here comes this straggling group of slaves, right? And Moses, their leader, goes up on this mountain, right? And at first, before he goes up on the mountain, by the way, God comes to the people, right, and declares, right, these 10 commandments, which, by the way, you should know that while Jews and Christians all agree that there's 10, they don't agree on the first 2. In other words, where the second and third commandments actually start. So that's always kind of interesting, and I cover that in my Intro to Bible class. But after that, the people stand there and they say, you know what, Moses? They say, oh my God, no, if we hear any more, we're going to die, right? Because God has a really powerful voice, right? They don't see him, but they say, if we hear any more, we're going to die. Please, Moses, get the rest of the message up on the mountain. So Moses goes up to the mountain, and he stays up there for 40 days, and some Jews believe he writes down the whole Torah while he's up there. And that was certainly what rabbinic Jews thought, and there's still Jews today who thought that. Most of us that study this stuff actually don't think he wrote down the whole Torah because we think it was compiled over a long time. Anyway, so he goes up to this mountain and he comes down and he's got all of these laws and regulations, and they cover myriad stuff, right? They cover everything from, right, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, which is the starting for the laws of keeping kosher, right? What you can and cannot eat, right? Separating meat from milk. They cover you will keep the Sabbath and what that means, that you won't do any work at all, right? They cover if 2 men are brawling, get into a fight, and one pushes the other, and they hit a pregnant woman, and her fetus is aborted, that's a payment of money. That's not a life for a life. So interestingly enough, that tells you where the Bible, or when the Bible thinks life begins. Life doesn't begin until that baby is born. And that's pretty standard for the ancient Near East, by the way. I always like to throw that in since it seems to be such a controversial topic today. So we get all of these laws and regulations. And it's very unclear, even by the time of the end of the Bible, even by that amount of time, it's very unclear how you're supposed to apply this to your day-to-day life. They actually require interpretation to even figure out what you're supposed to do. What does doing no work mean? I mean, it says that you're not even supposed to milk your cow. Really? I thought cows had to be milked, right? How do you decide what's work, right? And what do you do for all the inventions that we have today, right? I mean, interpreting these laws is required not only right at the end of the Bible when those people already don't know how to do it, but what do you do after there's no temple and you've got a whole bunch of laws and regulations about sacrifice? What do you do with that, right? So the covenant is, in some sense, a living and changing document within an authoritative tradition. And that's what these rabbis are doing. The rabbis, for hundreds of years, rabbis in Israel, in Babylonia, where Jews end up, significant number of Jews end up, and even right down to today. They study this law and the laws that come after that, the laws that the interpretations of that covenant, and from there they derive how to apply these laws. And it takes a lot of work, right? I mean, there's a lot of laws about kashrut that you would never think of. If you're not going to mix meat with milk, does that mean you need 2 sets of dishes? What if you can't afford 2 sets of dishes? Are all dishes the same? Well, no, they're not. Some dishes made out of ceramic are porous, and therefore, if you eat milk and then you eat meat off of them, actually there could be some milk in that dish because it's porous. But glass isn't porous. So if you boil the glass, all of a sudden you only need one set of dishes, right? So all of these things needed to be interpreted. The worst is that then I get a coughing jag, then my eyes start to water, then you all think I'm crying. I'm not. I'm passionate, but I'm not that passionate. So then you asked me about the temple. You know, what do people do about there not being a temple and there not being sacrifices? Well, that's true. That is kind of a problem. And there are, I know I'm not supposed to show my true color. There are people in Jerusalem who are waiting for a third temple, and they're going to start sacrifices. But clearly, even by the time of the temple's destruction, there's a lot of Jewish elites who in their thinking have already moved way beyond temple and sacrifice. Prayer is already very clearly in place as a way to communicate with God, right? I mean, I always teach my students in the Bible, the number one way to communicate with God is by, burning something up. Well, that's not true. By the time of the destruction of the temple, we have a lot of prayers in place. We already have synagogues in place all throughout, the ancient Near East. Wherever there are Jews congregated, they already have synagogues. So they already have a meeting place. We're not exactly sure what they do at that meeting place. Do they just have a prayer service? Do they read from the Torah? Does it look like our service today? We don't really know, right? We know a couple of things because we get it from the New Testament, because we know that Jesus shows up at a synagogue, right? We know in Alexandria, right, from the writings of Philo, he was actually a leader in his community. So we have some ideas here and there where people talk about it, but people have already moved, I think, way beyond the idea of sacrifice. And so I'm not worried about there being. I have no desire to see a third temple. But there are people getting ready. They're already making the clothes and everything.
And I actually have a follow-up question too, because listening to you is so fascinating, because I'm realizing I've heard a lot about Jewish customs and about the covenant and traditions and stuff, but from much more, I don't want to say much more conservative, but I guess, I don't know, maybe more Orthodox. I'm also from kind of Southwest Portland, which there's a lot of Orthodox Jews that live there, and so I guess so my question is, and this is totally self-disclosure, so if you don't feel like disclosing this, I understand, but I guess would you describe...
Be ready to blank out the tape. Beep. Yeah.
Would you be able, or how would you describe yourself, I guess, because I would be really interested to know if this is more of an academic approach to studying Judaism, or if this is, or if kind of what you're describing as more, I guess, non-Orthodox or or I guess more a liberal kind of view of it. Do you know what I mean?
No, because I'm not doing any of this. I mean, I'm not being academic right now. I'm just trying to explain to you sort of some of the, I mean, there's all these jokes, all these Jewish jokes about, every town, no matter what its size, has to have at least 3 synagogues. One that's the first one that's built, and then one that's built in response to that one, and then of course you need another one because you're not going to go to the other two. I mean, Jews have a history of not agreeing. I mean, they have it. While they're trying to bring about peace on earth, they're perfectly fine with not agreeing. I mean, there is no dogma in Judaism. There is no doctrine that you say, I accept this. So Judaism is the only religion where you actually could see something like this. Are you ready for this? So my parents belonged to a very large conservative congregation in Los Angeles. And I mean large, like we're talking between 3,000 and 5,000 families, okay? And on the high holy days, on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which if you did the reading doesn't occur at the beginning of the year at all, and on Yom Kippur, which is this Day of Atonement in which everybody does this self-reflection, literally everybody does go to the synagogue, and there's 5 different services all going on at the same time because no room could possibly hold all those people. So this service happened to take place in a gym that's on the 4th floor of this building. And we're sitting there in the service, and the rabbi comes in, and he asks people, raise your hand if you believe in an afterlife. Half the people raise their hands. Raise your hand if you don't believe in an afterlife. Half the people raise their hands. Raise your hand if you don't know. Very small group, right? And he goes on to give his sermon. And I was absolutely fascinated. I mean, I loved that he did that, right? Because these are all people who essentially, they belong to the same synagogue. They agree to support this particular community, services this way, this rabbi, right, this leader, and yet they don't even agree. Wouldn't you, come on, wouldn't you agree that whether you believe in life after death or not is kind of like a biggie in Judeo-Christian? Come on, really? Yeah, I think so. I would. I was amazed, right? That's how pluralistic Judaism is. Now this is a conservative, egalitarian synagogue. We're not talking about there's Orthodox people there, Reform people there. These are conservative Jews, right? So, you find things, and Judaism, if you think that's bizarre because there's no doctrine to it, right? I used to say for years, as I was studying all these rabbinic texts, it seems to me that the rabbis have a sense that at some point in your life, in anyone's life, you will not believe in God. And that they believe that if you continue to perform the commandments, as they have articulated them, of course, that will get you through to a place where you will come back to believing. That will get you through, right? You will remain a part of a community. You will remain engaged with the study of religion enough, right? And they believe that study is the highest form of prayer. So to them, it's not about what you stand and do, it's that you study these texts. This text, the word is everything, right? And in the course of that studying, in the course of performing the commandments, in the course of waking up in the morning, telling God, saying a blessing that you're alive, that you made it through the night okay. In the course of brushing your teeth and thanking God that you have teeth. In the course of washing your face and saying, I'm happy that, whether you believe in God or not, that in the course of doing all that, you will come back to a place of belief. Now, I studied for years, and I never actually saw that in print. I finally went to write a piece for a feminist. This is for a feminist publication where they wanted us to go through and do these sort of readings on the weekly readings of the Torah cycle, and we were supposed to write, what feminist stuff there was. And I'm like, oh my God, I do rabbinics. Like, there's not going to be anything feminist. But in the course of doing research for that, I come across, in this rabbinic interpretive book in Sifrei, where the rabbis actually say, performing the commandments will save Israel when Israel can't believe. So even belief in God is not a given. And you will meet plenty of Jews who don't believe in God, right? You're going to meet plenty of addicts who will do anything to go cop on a Saturday, but you suggest to them, go to this NA meeting that happens to meet in a church, and all of a sudden, no, I can't do that. Right now, I'm a good Jew. I can't do that, right? I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem in working. So do you notice I'm trying to bring this back on track, right? So that's the problem in working in social services, that as much as you know about the history and about the practice of Judaism, you're still going to run into this bizarre thing where you're just looking at the person like, really? You don't want to go to this therapist because you know that they're, an evangelical? Really? But, that's what happens. People are people, and they bring with them all of their foibles and all of their black marks, right into everything else. But nevertheless, there's an opportunity, right? And the opportunity is to understand a people who are so different. The fact that Jews have no doctrine, the fact that some Jews believe and some Jews don't believe, the fact that Orthodox will tell you we do it because it's in the law. We do it because it's in the law. They'll always say that, but they'll never go back and figure out, well, why is it in the law? And conservative and Reformed Jews, who are most of the Jews that you're actually going to meet throughout the United States, the conservative and Reform movements are much bigger than the Orthodox movement. For those Jews who do observe kashrut, for those Jews who do continue to observe all those food customs, why are they doing it? Because, in essence, they believe that there's rationale to those laws. That In fact, if we're allowed to eat whatever we want to eat, whenever we want to eat it, we don't really consider what it means that we're taking a life every single time we eat. So even though if you actually keep kosher and you follow every single one of these little laws, will you every single time you sit down to eat remember that you took a life and that's why you keep kosher? No. But might you remember every 50th time? You might. And then that's saying something, because that's bringing that spirituality right into your life. And that's what Rabbinic Judaism is all about. No matter what kind of Jew you are, that's what those rabbis were trying to do. They were trying to invest every aspect of daily life with spirituality, with remembering that God does these things for us. You didn't create the tree that has that amazing smell. God did. So when you smell it, you say a blessing. Thanks, God, for creating those things that have good smells.
When you were talking about the Bible's interpretation of when life starts with abortion, I was wondering what Judaism, I'm like sitting over here like Wikipedia things, just so I'm like not asking a question like way out there, but what is, because I feel like for Christianity, just because like that's in like the society that I've grown up in, even though I don't, follow it, it seems to be people are either like pro-choice, no choice, and then the same with homosexuality and marriage, and just very like basic human rights issues. And I was wondering like, if it kind of feels like maybe Judaism might be a little bit more open to interpretation and a little bit more okay with changing certain things as time moves forward. And like what is the stance on that? And if it is a little bit more like giving than Christianity in America, I don't know. I had a friend that lived in Tel Aviv, and he was like, the gay community here is like booming. It's a great place to live if you're a gay man or a gay woman. And it's like, that seems like our version of San Francisco. But I don't know. I'm just wondering like what those differences are.
Well, it depends what Jewish community you're in. Like, it's not good to be gay in the Orthodox community, and I can tell you that from firsthand experience of working with somebody who knew he was gay from very young. His father was a very, very important guy in the ultra-Orthodox community in the Northeast, and this guy got so depressed he became a horrible alcoholic, and eventually he threw himself underneath a subway in New York City, and by some miracle, and I mean miracle, he did not die. What did his parents do? They shipped him off to Israel to live with an aunt in a super religious community on the outskirts of Jerusalem, where he would have really no access to any transportation on the weekends. He would not see anybody who was not ultra-Orthodox. And eventually he ended up walking literally miles on Sabbath in order to come into Jerusalem, continue his drinking. And when that didn't work for him anymore, he completely left the community. He got sober and in a teeny group in Jerusalem, and he ended up leaving, the ultra-Orthodox community entirely and this was all about gender identification. I mean, this was all about he happened to be gay. I mean, he was clearly just born that way. So, so there was no way to make being gay and being Orthodox, in that community work. Now, whether there will be in other communities, I don't know. I mean, certainly in conservative Judaism and in Reform Judaism, being gay is, not some issue. I mean, that's, you're Jewish. That's kind of where it's at, right? So what's the difference? So I think that it depends what community you're in. I mean, clearly Reform Judaism grew out of an understanding that that while the texts are sacred, that all of the texts of the rabbis, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Talmuds, that those rabbinic writings, that while they might have been inspired, they weren't on the same level of sacredness as, say, the Hebrew Bible. And once Reform Judaism started moving in that direction, it was going to be much more accepting of lots of people, because eventually it was going to get to the point where they were going to say, oh, right, there's, pretty good historical, scientific, archaeological evidence that the Hebrew Bible itself is not a sacred text, i.e. written by God. It's written by humans, and we need to make this religion accessible and meaningful for people today, right? And therefore, we're going to keep changing it. Conservative Judaism took a slightly different road. They actually didn't want to throw out all of the rituals and all of the rabbinic, interpretation in one fell swoop. Conservative Jews said, that's really too far for us. We also don't believe that, the oral Torah that the rabbis practiced was given on Mount Sinai when the written Torah was, which is what the rabbis had said about their own works, hundreds, thousands of years ago, and Orthodox Jews continue to say. Conservative Jews said, we, though, believe that as we also don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, in a sense, right? We're not going to throw it all away. So we're going to analyze these laws as they come up. We're going to continue to write responsa literature, which since the close of the Talmud, rabbis have been writing for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? This responsa literature. How do you interpret not doing work on the Sabbath? How do you interpret this law of kashrut? And so conservative Jews have continued to do that. And the guy, Elliot Dorff, the rabbi who wrote on abortion, actually wrote a whole responsa piece on is abortion legal in Judaism, and if it is, under what circumstances? And so what he wrote in his responsa, and he's a rabbi, he happens to live in Los Angeles, he wrote that abortion is legal, that it had always been legal to save the life of the mother, and so conservative Judaism should continue to follow that, and that he would extend understanding saving the life of the mother to extend to if it would cause her great mental or emotional harm, to bring that child into existence. So, people can go from there. So, and I think that's why, in part it's that. That's how the religion deals with things. Most American Jews have found themselves on the liberal side of causes for many, many years. It really wasn't until the 80s with the rise of, Reagan and a number of other issues that you started to see Jews politically swing to the right, and that had mostly to do with Israel and what they viewed as protection of the state of Israel. But by and large, you will see that the cause of sort of liberal America, Jews came over to this country and were working in sweatshops, horrible, horrible sweatshops. When unions came, when the idea of unions came around, Jews were at the forefront of unions. That's where they were at the forefront of, to protect workers. Jews came to this country and experienced all kinds of anti-Semitism, and as a result of having experienced persecution in Eastern Europe before that, and anti-Semitism here in the 1960s, in the civil rights, as the civil rights movement got going, Jews felt that they had an ethical obligation to enter into that, right? So, and work towards the civil rights of everyone. They constantly, and they see this as sort of the prophetic ideal. Like that's what there's, the prophets, if you look at, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, well, not even so much Ezekiel, but Isaiah and Jeremiah and what we think of in Amos and, these other prophets, what the prophetic message is in the Hebrew Bible that conservative and Reformed Jews adopted, certainly in the United States, was one of protecting the weakest in our society. The prophets talk about the women, the orphan, the foreigner, the people who have nowhere to go, nothing to eat. It is your job to make sure that they have food to eat, a roof over their heads, that they are well taken care of. And so you will see Jews politically, they can't help it, right? It's sort of ingrained in everything, Look at Passover. Passover, Jews celebrate this Seder. The rabbis wrote this Seder. This whole service takes place in the home around a meal. Everything in Judaism, forget a synagogue. You could have no synagogue. There could be no temple, no synagogue. Judaism would still survive. Why? All the major holidays take place in the home. If you did that reading, you would start to see, Passover's in the home. Purim, you have a big feast. Hanukkah, you light a candelabra at your home. Everything's in the home, practically, right? So once you have that, you're sitting at a Seder. The rabbis don't say that you have to believe the story of the Exodus. You don't have to. They don't care. You have to think of yourself as a slave who has just been freed. That one night a year, and for the rest of that holiday, you have to stop and think about what it would mean if you had just secured your freedom. And when you do that, if you really take that to heart, even once a year, I sit at a Seder, I lead a Seder every year, and I'm almost blown away at thinking about, really, what would it really have been like to have really been a slave? And the second I do that, I can't walk past that guy who begs out in front of PLC and not give him some money. It changes everything that I think about, like for the next several months until I need another reminder, right? Because I'm human. But so you can see that, I don't even remember what your question was now. But Judaism has both, it depends on what community you're in, right, in part. But the religion itself is constructed around these series of rituals and this series of celebrations or remembrances of, horrible things and memories of good things, right? That are about sort of not thinking about, am I spiritual, am I not, am I good, am I not, am I a sinner, am I great? No, it's about celebrating what we have, right, of God's world and how we're going to make it better. Is that kind of, no?
Yeah, no, I think
I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, yeah, no, it did. I don't know, I think it's beautiful. I think it's really beautiful how it seems like, at least for you, you're talking about making the world for your son peaceful right now, and that's not the goal, but what you work towards, and I don't know, I think that's very beautiful.
I have a question that we haven't really talked about yet, but Kabbalah. So Kabbalah, is that like a branch of Judaism? I'm really confused. Like the only time I really hear about people talking about it is like Madonna's Kabbalist or whatever. And I'm wondering like how much it relates to Judaism, what Kabbalah really is, and if it's like, is that like a new branch of Judaism or has it existed for a while?
Kabbalah is a form of mysticism.
Yeah.
It's a certain strand of Jewish mysticism, and the mysticism really gets going in the Middle Ages, and Kabbalah gets going in the Middle Ages, so it's very, very old. And mysticism and mystical practices.
Is it like meditation mixed with?
It's there's text, there's mystical texts, and then there are certain forms of meditation. And Kabbalah originally, the practice of mysticism, nobody. First of all, women were never supposed to do it. Men who were younger than 40 were never supposed to do it. And I think some of the meditative practice, and it was supposed to be secret, So, that Madonna's practicing Kabbalah is kind of interesting. It's not a form of Judaism. We think of Jewish denominations, right? And Kabbalah isn't a denomination. It doesn't have, a group of rabbis involved in it. You don't have synagogues, She happens to go to this Kabbalah center in Los Angeles, and there may be another Kabbalah center in New York, but it's not like you have Jews who are practicing sort of a way of life around it. Jews are Jews and may practice certain forms of mysticism. I'm not really into the whole Kabbalistic thing. Go ahead.
Could you speak a little bit to the concept of a Jew who's practicing the religion identifies with religious Judaism versus a person who identifies as like culturally Jewish? The difference between religiously Jewish.
That's really good. I'm really glad you asked that because I haven't talked about that at all. And part of that's just because we're sort of just, I'm fielding questions. And gosh, I hope the rabbi doesn't come and feel like I answered all these wrong. But I don't think he will. He's so nice. So, that is the hitch about Judaism, right? Because it's a religion. You can convert to it like you can other religions, right? You can convert to Christianity, right? But then there are Jews who are just born Jewish, right? And so we say that they're ethnically Jewish, right? They may not do anything that's at all Jewish, but they happen to have a parent who's Jewish. And that's also a sticky wicket, right? Because it used to be that your mother had to be Jewish, but now Reform Judaism in the U.S. will recognize people as being Jewish who have a father who is Jewish and who are practicing Jews in some way. You know, belong to a synagogue, light candles on Friday night, something, right? So it used to be that it was just that, if the mother's Jewish, the children are Jewish. Now, this got going during the Roman period. This is an early rabbinic law, right? In the Bible, what you find is that your designation as either a Kohen, meaning a priest, or a Levite, I call them the second-class priests, the guys who would take care of the temple, right? Or as a regular Israelite, that tribal designation, in the Bible at least, came through your father. So why this change in Judaism? Well, guess what? Jews find themselves living in a Roman Empire and in other places where they are attacked, where women get raped. And the problem is, according to Judaism's, the rabbi's own legal laws surrounding inheritance, if the child of that woman is considered a bastard, and I'm not swearing here, that's a legal term in rabbinic law, if that child's a mamzer, a bastard, then he cannot inherit. And so to ensure, and he's not a member of the community, it affects him in all kinds of ways, whether he could ever be a voting member in the community, all kinds of things, whether he could be called up in the synagogue, right? It's very problematic. So what do the rabbis do? Well, they don't ask, right? It's don't ask, don't tell. If your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. Now, what happens with the Holocaust comes rolling around, right? In Germany, the Nazis decide if you have a Jewish grandparent, you're Jewish. They totally change the rules. Of course, why should they have to define it by Judaism's laws? They don't care, right? So now you have people, that's what was so, I think, there's a lot of things that are appalling about World War II. But you had a whole group of Jews who are as assimilated as Jews are today. You don't walk down the street unless somebody is dressed quite orthodoxly, quite observantly. You wouldn't know whether I was Jewish or not. What if I only have one grandparent who's Jewish? I get thrown into a camp, right, and gassed like everybody else, and my children, my husband, my children, everybody, well, that's what they did. And so now you can see, I don't think Jews ever questioned before, what's an ethnic identifier, what's not. But clearly other people do, right? So, and today in this country, we do have a significant group of Jews who culturally identify as Jew and do nothing discernibly. You just would never, what do they eat? Bagels and like cream cheese. I know a lot of people who eat bagels and like cream cheese, and they're not Jewish, right? So you have a lot of Jews, say, who ethnically identify because one or the other parent is Jewish. Now, what communities are they accepted into of Jewish communities? Well, I don't, Orthodox, I guess if their mother was Jewish and they were willing to now do all the things that Orthodox Jews do, right? You're starting to get that, we measure Jews by how observant they are because there's no doctrine, right? I can tell something about you by the way you dress. Do you shake my hand? What holidays do you celebrate? Would you eat? I have friends that keep kosher to the degree that when they go out to eat, they'll only eat vegetarian food. I have friends who keep kosher to a degree that they will only eat in a vegetarian restaurant. I have friends who are kosher to a degree that they won't eat out at all, right? So how do you tell? And then I have, plenty of friends who have one or more Jewish parents. And do they feel Jewish? Yeah. Do they do anything Jewish? No. Okay, before I go to everybody else, do you have a follow-up question?
It's not a follow-up, it's a whole new question.
Okay,
It's mine's related.
Okay.
So when I was in Israel over winter break, I met a lot of people our age that live in Israel, and as far as the whole like religion versus culture goes, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying how if Judaism was often defined by the mother being Jewish, but then in the Holocaust it was the grandparent, and I'm pretty sure the state of Israel accepts everyone as a grandparent because they said if Hitler's going to consider them a Jew, we will consider them a Jew.
Now all that's up for grabs again because the chief rabbi in Israel keeps shooting his mouth off and saying different stuff. I actually think that that's now changed, but it's going to come up before the courts. It's going to come up before the law.
But so the people our age that were some of my friends that live in Israel, some of them wouldn't consider themselves religious. So I was like, how do you consider yourself Jewish if you don't consider yourself religious? Like I didn't really get it, and like they gave me examples of just like Yom Kippur, like you were talking about. No one drives in the streets on Yom Kippur. Everyone walks everywhere, and they're not religious, so they're not like celebrating the holiday in their home. But none of them drive. You know what I mean? So it's just this like...
Well, in Israel, you have this phenomenon that you have essentially, the majority of the population is Jewish. And most Israelis, we always see, what we see on TV usually are these very Orthodox-looking people, right? And, coats and hats and, or we see guys with kippot, the skull cap on. But by and large, most Israelis are not religious at all, would not be caught dead, excuse the expression, in a synagogue, like do not celebrate anything. And, interestingly enough, in Israel, here, right, we get off Saturday, but all of our stores are open, right? And on Sunday is when everybody goes to church, right? And it used to be on Sunday, it used to be when I was growing up, all the stores were closed. The department stores weren't open on Sundays. In fact, nothing was really open on Sundays. But here in the States, you can feel a difference between Saturday and Sunday, right? Well, guess what? You know what the day off everybody has in Israel? Saturday, because that's the Jewish Sabbath. That's the day everybody takes off, right? And Friday is like Saturday, sort of. Some people work on Fridays, some people don't, right? Some people, I was always upset because I had a class on Friday morning when I was in Israel, but all of my other friends were sitting and they all had breakfast together. Does this sound familiar? They got together for breakfast, they read the paper, they had cappuccinos, right? That's what they all did. That's Friday. Saturday's kind of like Sunday. It's like really dead. But most Israelis they're not engaged in that at all. They're secular. They're completely secular. They just happen to be Jewish.
Can I say
Wait. So I have to go over here.
Yeah, the question I had was, I lived in Europe, Brussels, Belgium. There was a lot of tension, and so a lot of hate toward Jews, and there's a lot of Jews in Europe. So my question was, I was confused. I was asking myself that this is a community that is peaceful. They haven't done anything like attacking other people. Why are Jews so hated around the world like that? Why? That's the question. And one of the...
Have you read the New Testament?
Yes, I've read the New Testament. Yeah.
Who kills Jesus?
The New Testament says Jews. Yeah, but these people who are Jews around, most of them, some of them are Muslim, some of them are Christian, some of them don't have any religion at all. So the question, some of the things I was hearing was that some of them were not even, if they were to go and seek service, many people will say there's no more help for you, because they are Jews and they think like Jews are the ones who are ruling Europe and the United States. They are so rich, and why do they seek service? If they see a Jew coming like to social service, I saw that in some communities in Belgium where they kind of mock them and so forth. So
it's interesting. If they were so rich, why do they have people who are seeking social services?
I don't know.
I always wonder about that.
I'm asking you that question because the
thing about Jews ruling the world and being so rich actually got a lot of play in a book called The Protocols of Zion, which was put out by, believe it or not, Henry Ford, the guy who invented the Ford, essentially. And that book has been published and republished over the years. It's unbelievable. And he just said it because he hated Jews. And people read it and they believe it. I mean, it's got most, the place where it's published the most now is in the Middle East. What a surprise.
So
but Jews don't, so
do you see some of the evidence though, because I have a friend she's the responsible for Springfield district, and she even invited me to go in the synagogue once. And the question is that if you see many Jewish communities, there is a lot of educated and lawyers and so forth. So that's why I was asking myself that, do you think it's that people are kind of jealous about that and thinking, why are these people?
Well, I would love to tell you that, but historically they weren't. All those Jews that were living in Eastern Europe weren't educated. My grandmother didn't have beyond a third grade education. I think my grandfather had maybe a sixth grade education. So, historically they weren't, and they were really poor, and it didn't matter. People still did that. One of the reasons why Jews very quickly, in an open society, Jews will very quickly sort of, rise intellectually and academically to the height, I think has to do with sort of these thousands of years of tradition of study being the highest form of prayer, right? That in traditional yeshiva setting, when everyone was Orthodox, and even now for the Orthodox, what do? They study these texts all day. They study these laws all day. And when you go to study in a chavruta setting with somebody else, where you study, chavruta is this little group of friends that you would study with, right? One person reads what's in the text aloud, and then it gets discussed aloud. So a lot of people have surmised that one of the reasons that there's so many Jews actually in psychology and psychiatry and these other fields has to do with this talking aloud, like the way of self-discovering by talking aloud. Others say the reason there's so many Jews who are involved in law has to do with the fact that they have this history of studying these legal texts, right, and arguing the minutiae in them, right? And, there are others who say that, part of the reason that Jews always have this interest in medicine has to do with, Maimonides or the Rambam, who was one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of all time, who also was a physician. Do I believe that there's a connection between people who like to study and people who like to argue and people who, like to learn new things, and that Jews, they have that culturally, back to that cultural question, and somewhat religiously, right? They're constantly, every week, they're reading from a scroll. It's an ancient text. It's very hard to understand. So they have a whole part of the service that's surrounding interpreting the text, right? So, part of what I think you're seeing there is sort of a cultural reason why, when these people do have access to public education, right? Other than the dollar, there was nothing stopping my father from becoming a doctor, right? He had totally uneducated parents who were like, study, study, study. That's all he was supposed to do. And he did. And, he ended up going to college on scholarship. And then he ended up going to medical school. He just, on scholarship. And it's not so much that he's so bright. It comes from that, I think, and I think that you see that with other immigrant groups. Why do people love to hate Jews, more than others? Why do people in this country have a thing with black people? I don't know. That's like,
It is a very difficult question.
Well, but I think all of those, why does somebody hate somebody? They're all kind of like, why do people hate Jews? Well, because, they see that they killed Christ. I don't know. Every single Christian group, mainstream group that I can think of has disavowed that, and people still keep it up. Why do people think Jews are rich? I don't know, maybe because in Europe in the medieval period, the only jobs that Jews could have were to be money lenders, which actually breaks their own law, but that was what they were left with having to be. And guess who borrowed from them? The kings, right? And then when they didn't want to pay it back, they just expelled them to another place. But, does somebody always need somebody to kick and demonize? I think so. As far as I can tell, in the West Coast, at least where I've lived, in Los Angeles and Orange County, guess what? People do that with Mexicans. right? It's the next big immigrant group. And I've seen people treat Mexicans as if they weren't even human, as if they had no ears, as if they couldn't hear. I mean, it's, it's kind of appalling, right? And then there was a huge wave of Vietnamese, refugees. Well, do people look at the Vietnamese that way? In some cases, yeah. In Santa Ana, they did, But then there were so many more Mexicans, they could always do it to the Mexican. I don't know. I mean, I'm always trying to figure that out, but I've never totally figured it out. But I think there's a good reason. I mean, Jews are sort of like a thorn in the side of the world that's constantly saying, yeah, we can do better, we can do better, we can do, right? That's got to bother people after a while.
There's nothing wrong with that, but thank you for your response. That was good.
Yeah. By the way, the Muslim situation is different, right? Because that's connected to Israel. And that's a fundamental problem, that as long as Jews within themselves, and this is coming to a head actually even in places like Eugene, where there are Jews who say you have to have undying support for Israel, no matter what Israel does. Don't critique Israel because it gives the rest of the world a place to expand anti-Semitism. But there's other Jews who say, if I don't critique Israel, who will? Right? I should critique Israel. Those are my people. I better tell them when I don't agree what they're doing in the territories, or I don't agree with this, or I don't agree with that, right? And so that's where Jews have their own problems within them. And I think that, in the Muslim world, part of it has to do with this, maybe a rejection of Islam, but I think a much greater degree has to do with, wow, we see our kinsmen, right? We see Palestinians as our kinsmen, and they're really not being treated well by this group. That country is predominantly Jewish. That's a Jewish state. We hate Jews. And to me, that seems logical, right? I don't think it's right that they throw in these poor Jews who are living in Brussels with it. They're not Israelis. They're not, but...
The sad part is that someone want to achieve their dreams and why hate them? So that's what confusing because, and one Jew, sorry, I know that you get your question. Yeah. So that Jewish lady said that the reason why we are so educated because we have nothing. Everything was taken away from us, and then we have to tell our kids and so forth that we have education. We need to hold on to that. So that's what.
But that's true in every generation, and I wasn't born with nothing. I have plenty. I'm not rich, but I have, in terms of the rest of the world, I guess I am. We all are. Everybody sitting in this room is rich compared to the rest of the world, right? Or most of the world. But I will push my son. Yeah, he's got to be educated. Why not? He has a good brain on his head, Why not? You all do. I should push you.
What's your from Dana and then take
Okay.
I have a really short question. So you said that someone who is born ethnically Jewish and does their parent have to be practicing?
No. That's the rub, is that, if you show up to an Orthodox court for a Jewish divorce, so not your legal divorce that happens in the regular courts, but your Jewish divorce, right? And you are born Jewish, where those Orthodox rabbis, however many there are at that court, 4 or 5 Orthodox rabbis, they know that you have a Jewish mother, and your husband may have had a Reform conversion. He may have been converted by Reform rabbis. So you show up at that court, they will refer to you as the Jew, whether you do anything. You don't have to do anything, and they will refer to your husband as the foreigner, because they don't accept the Reform conversion, even though he may be doing everything at home and you do nothing. Is that crazy? And on that happy note, I think we're going to take a break.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're back for more. Did we leave any stone unturned? Have we totally confused you? So we're going to try and get back in the direction of human services, right? Because now we've talked about this bizarre religion with this really closed communities where they really, tolerate outsiders, but not really. No, I'm just kidding. But Jewish communities can seem somewhat closed, right? They sort of have their own words, their own terms. You heard a lot of them already. So the Torah actually, right, I mean, I would say Torah actually has a lot of meanings. Torah can refer to what God gave to Moses up on Sinai, but usually when we talk about Torah today, we're talking about the first 5 books of the Bible, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The Hebrew Bible, right, you probably call it the Old Testament. Jews call it Tanakh. Tanakh, and it's an acronym. It stands for the 3 sections. The T in Tanakh is for Torah, those first 5 books. The N in Tanakh is for Nevi'im, or prophets, which runs all the way from the book of Joshua all the way through to the last prophet, Malachi. We can talk about how those are organized, but doesn't really relate to human services. And the last section of Tanakh, the Ch sound, is Ketuvim, or writings. And those are the scrolls, things like Psalms, Ecclesiastes.
Dead Sea Scrolls, those considered?
No, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the earliest writing down, some of the earliest manuscripts that we have of not only books of the Bible, but lots of other stories, right? And they were found near the Dead Sea, and we're not sure, but we think there's a community, and a somewhat ascetic community associated with them, the community of the Essenes. Okay, anything else we should look at here? Exodus, we don't really need to talk about that. Moses, right, and Orthodox Judaism. Okay, so let's move on to human services, and let's talk about what happens when somebody comes in to visit you. You know, we've been talking a lot about American Judaism, and some of those stereotypes that we were talking about, you know, all Jews are rich. Don't be shocked when you see homeless Jews in New York. You know, there are homeless Jews. Other stereotypes, that they're all well educated. Well, that wasn't true before, and there are a lot of educated Jews, but they're not all educated. A couple of stereotypes that Jews have, and I think they still have. They're being turned over quite quickly. But certainly it was very strong in the 80s, still strong in the 90s. I still run across people that think this, but I'm hoping that those numbers are going down. But there are some stereotypes. One is that Jews are not alcoholics. Not true. Jews themselves and other people for a long time thought that 10% of the population that has a predisposition towards alcoholism and drug addiction, that Jews didn't have that. Well, they do. They have it. They have the predisposition. They have it in the same rates as everybody else. And so they have that. Jews in some Jewish communities really don't believe that Jews, like the rest of the population, can have issues with abuse, whether it be child abuse or, you know, spousal abuse or, you know, just abuse. Yes, they do. They absolutely do. They're the same as everybody else, right? I'm trying to think of another one. Jews are probably don't feel the same stigmas that some other groups feel about going to psychologists or other therapists. I sat next to, on a plane for one trip, a student who was from Kuwait, comes from a fairly conservative Muslim family. He had become very, very depressed at school and had sought out counseling, and his father just came unglued when he found out. So that kind of response you won't normally see in Jewish families. They're down with the let's get some help kind of thing. They don't have a problem with that, but that doesn't mean they're going to be any better than anybody else at, you know, supporting a child through it or going themselves or something like that. So what can that mean to you as the person who's, you know, trying to get services? And we talked about sort of some people will be very feel very off-put by saying, you know, I want you to go to this meeting that meets at, you know, the Crystal Cathedral, right? And that kind of stuff. So some suggestions that may or may not be helpful to you. One would be if there is a Jewish social service agency in the town, those agencies can be very useful in those situations. The Jewish Federation in Eugene, Oregon, has a social worker who works for the Jewish Federation, and she works predominantly with Jews who are having issues, either getting them, referrals to counseling or, a night inside, someplace if they're homeless, that kind of thing. So a Jewish social service agency can be really helpful. If you hit the ground running in whatever city or whatever town you end up with, and you end up, with a list of meetings for, AA or NA or, whatever the recovery program is that you're working with, if out of that list you can cull groups that meet in, sort of an environment that isn't a church environment, that might be better for, that Jewish person. Sometimes you'll find, you end up being the social service person working at a hospital, and you'll find that, of your clients, you'll have some Jewish clients that just, don't want anything to do with you. At that point, it might be time to call in a rabbi, a somebody else who can step in and work with that family, at least to get you back on track in terms of working with them and finding out their issues. So I don't think the idea is, well, you need to know everything about Judaism, right? The idea is, don't be shocked when you come up against somebody who, by all rights, you should be able to help just by being an understanding person and having all of these skills in your pockets that you already have, right? Don't let it put you off, right? You can still help them. You can still find them ways, but it may not be as direct a way as you would with somebody else. And I suspect that that will be true for some Muslims, and especially for people that we see coming into the country from Iraq, right? We're already seeing that if you follow the news of what's happening in San Diego, where there are a lot of Iraqi refugees. They're already finding problems in interfacing with social service agencies and already finding huge cultural shifts, much bigger than you would find with the Jews, or cultural issues surrounding getting help, what kinds of things are normal in America that are totally abnormal in other countries, that kind of stuff. So I just want to get you thinking in that direction, and if you have questions sort of in that direction, things that you've wondered about, we talked about the situation, right? You meet the Orthodox parents at the school. Yeah, you may not want to stick out your hand to shake their hands, and that can actually go, I'm so used to shaking hands. It's my mother grilled us with shaking hands, and I've come across a lot of people who, for whatever reason, in the mental health world, there's a lot of people that, they don't want to shake your hand, it freaks them out, whatever reason. And so I can think where, that would be off-putting to those people too. But it's my first inclination. It's what I always do. To me, that's professional, right? It's really a problem. So, questions?
What's a get?
What's a get? Okay. So divorce is legal in Judaism, and a lot of people seek to get a divorce. When they want a divorce, they get a divorce in the regular American courts, the regular civil courts, and they also want a Jewish divorce. And to get a Jewish divorce means that the couple will appear before the Beit Din. That is a group of rabbis. They actually sit in big, judges' chairs and stuff. It's kind of interesting. They won't necessarily ask questions. There's not like a trial or anything like that. But they will come up with a document that's written in Aramaic. It's an ancient language that was the lingua franca, the language spoken by Jews, from the time of the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC, when the elite Jews of Jerusalem were exiled to Babylonia. Then they started speaking in Aramaic. When they come back and they rebuild the second temple, they continue to speak in Aramaic. Jews have written legal documents in Aramaic and in Rabbinic Hebrew for many, many years, but The get is written in Aramaic, and it stipulates essentially that the two people are divorced. And interestingly enough, in that document, it actually gets torn. The document itself gets torn. It's kind of interesting. And the woman gets the copy of it. Why? Because she has to be able to prove that she has a legal divorce because she can't remarry without it. And if she does remarry without it and has a child, the child can have that standing as bastard if she doesn't have proof that she was done with her previous relationship. Now, how does this relate back to human social services? Hang on one second. I'm going to tell you a remarkable story. It'll only take a few minutes. There's a bookseller in New York. He's a Jewish bookseller. He's obviously extremely orthodox, and he sells all these Jewish books, and I deal in rabbinic books, and I need a book. I need this book. We don't have it in our library, and I don't know what to do. I absolutely need it. And I'm hunting all these Jewish bookstores around the country. I'm calling all these numbers. Everybody says, you got to call this guy. So I go to call that guy, and what do? I log online. I do a Google search for that name, of course, wouldn't you? And I come up with a list of stories about September 11th and the bombing of those, the planes flying into those buildings. And the story connected with that name, it became very clear to me that this was the book dealer's son that this story was about. They live in a very Orthodox community on Staten Island. The son is a financial guy who's in one of those buildings. And I'll probably cry as I tell this story. You have to excuse me. It really hit me hard, this story. I've never forgotten this. The son was in the building. A plane had flown into the building. He called home. He talked to his wife. And she became very, very distressed. The TV was on. She saw what was happening. They didn't know whether they were supposed to get out of the building or not, and then they couldn't get out of the building. And he asked her to go get his best friend who lived across the street. And she did. She got the best friend. When the best friend realized what was happening, he immediately called for the rabbi on his cell phone. He called for the rabbi to come to the house. He stayed on the phone with his friend, and his friend, who is a financial guy, he's a financial investment guy, told his best friend how he wanted all of his monies invested and taken care of in order to take care of his children and his wife, because he knew he wasn't leaving this building. And then the smoke got very bad in the room where he was, and there were other people trapped there with him, and they began to try and throw chairs against the windows just to get some more air, but that was futile. Then somebody had also gotten a doctor from down the street to come over. The doctor came over, and he talked to the man and told them to start tearing off their clothes and wetting their clothes and putting it up to their faces that they would be able to breathe longer. They got the rabbi on the phone to read him the last rites and to read Psalm 23, right? I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and to say prayers with him. And then they heard him yell, and that's all they heard. Now, you know that people are still trying to find pieces of their loved ones, that they're still digging people up. By Jewish law, if there is not a divorce and you don't have the person's body in order to bury them, the wife is considered an agunah. She cannot remarry. She cannot even mourn her husband. Without a body, without a burial, she can't mourn her husband. How did that law come into being? Because Jewish merchants used to travel at sea they could be lost for months, even years at a time. But to ensure that their wives didn't just move on with their lives, and to ensure that they could come back to them, right? You have this law that you can't just do that. You have to have the body. This woman had the rabbi there. There's no body. And so the rabbis now passed a law, because they taped the entire conversation and could hear this man's death, essentially. They heard him yell out, and then the building collapsed. Because they heard the end of his life, they are using the tape as evidence of his body, and she can have a service, can observe mourning, can observe the memorial, for a week, and then the 30 days, and then the 1 year, so that she can move on with her life. No other women in this community who lost people who lost husbands on September 11th, and there's many of them, they cannot have funerals. They can't have mourning rituals. Everything in a Jewish funeral surrounds the people who are living. That's what it's for. It's to help the people who are living. The person who's dead is dead, right? Everything surrounding the funeral is for the living to eventually to be able to think about the person, talk about the person. You sit on an overturned chair, you tear a piece of your clothing, you don't wash for a certain amount of time. You really let yourself, right, feel the loss of this person, and then you can move on. These other women, can't move on. But this friend had the presence of the forethought, right, to think, we're going to tape this conversation, we're going to walk into this rabbinic court, and we're going to use this as a way to prove this. I'm amazed at how these people handle this. Now, obviously, it doesn't bring back her husband. It doesn't, she's obviously still in mourning, but she at least gets to observe the rituals. So I just wanted to explain to you why a Beit Din can be very important, right? This Beit Din has had the presence. It was obviously that rabbi was probably the one who came up with the idea, let's tape this conversation. He probably was already thinking, oh my God, this is a disaster for our community. He obviously in his head could add up how many of these guys are in this building, So anyway, just wanted to share that with you. It was a long way of saying that's what a get is. But is that the kind of thing you would now come up against in social services? Obviously, you go to New York, you're going to be coming up with a lot more, you're going to see a lot more Jews. Can I prepare you for something as awful as what September 11th was? No, but wow, what a bizarre thing to think about. All of a sudden now you're knee deep as human social service workers, you're knee deep in sort of what this tragedy means on a personal level, not just for somebody emotionally inside, but for a whole community and these bizarre rituals they have and how it's constructed. So, I just applaud the numbers of people like you who must, work in these fields and work with these people. I just read this thing and I couldn't even imagine, who do you turn to? Well, you turn to you guys to get help and figure these things out.
So, 2 questions the class can answer, I guess. So in that situation, how would you counsel those women who can't mourn their husbands?
Well, these women are in extremely orthodox settings. I don't know that they personally would ever come to you. I could see their children acting out and you ending up, you're in a school situation, you're in another situation, now you're confronting the children. And, in a case like that, I really think, obviously, I am not a medical doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I would suggest counseling, right? And I would try and get them to be able to do in counseling what they can't do ritualistically in the community, right? Because I think that in counseling, by going and talking, one then does that release and possibly can get that kind of closure, right? And I would imagine for a lot of these people it would be special trauma counseling. I do know somebody who, their child died right in front of them, and he couldn't even close his eyes. He had to go to trauma counseling just to be able to close. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't even think. All he did was he closed his eyes and he would see it over and over and over again.
are the women allowed to go seek counseling since they aren't allowed to? Are the children allowed to go?
I don't. It depends probably on the community, right? So, but that's what I would work towards. I would work towards, can we get you into a counseling situation that will work? Well, not for you. What about your children? Would that be possible? Is there something we can do through school? Is there something, and there's certainly sometimes avenues at which that child sort of is a little bit separated from the community, or somebody within the community who just hasn't been tapped in yet. There's plenty of Orthodox therapists. That's another. And did you say you had a second question?
I did, and it's to that news article that came out with the woman who couldn't get the get because her husband wouldn't give her.
Yeah.
So, as a counselor, anybody, how can you help her, or is it only up to the board?
Well, most of the rabbinic boards, most of the Beit Deans are extremely helpful in getting women gets. So in a Jewish divorce, it's the man who asks for the divorce. And if the man doesn't agree, the Beit Din, ostensibly can't force him. But they can. There's a lot of ways that they can force him. And it used to be that they really wouldn't. They just didn't really care about these women or, whatever. But now they very much do. And they very much realize how disastrous they can be. So Beit Deans will essentially use sort of all of their arsenal in order to help them. And so you could actually, I don't know if you calling the Beit Din would do anything, but you could say to this woman, do you know of somebody, your rabbi or somebody else who might know a rabbi in the Beit Din, and go about it that way, right? Or have her call another woman, a lot of times the wife of the rabbi who's on the Beit Din, and go that route to talk into that man's ear. But Beit Deans, at least in the United States, will often go to great lengths to help women. They can even hold up, if it's the man who wants the divorce, the woman can say that she won't sign the civil divorce papers until there's a Beit Din, until the Beit Din meets and she gets a get. And that's a very easy way to hold that up. But it can be a problem in Orthodox communities.
Are you a conservative or Orthodox Jew?
Me? I'm a conservative egalitarian is how I was raised, but the synagogue in Eugene is a Reconstructionist synagogue. And we didn't talk about Reconstructionism, but we'll let Rabbi Yitz handle that.
Yeah, the question I have is that there's in every religion, like Christianity, Islam, there is those who are, in Christianity, when they say conservative, it means like Orthodox in Judaism.
Yeah, but it's not the same in Judaism. Do you want me to explain that?
Yes, I want you to explain that, but I want to finish this question that I have received, very important. So then when you see, like in the conservative Christianity, or Islamic and so forth, my point that I want to touch is about the freedom of women. I would like to know if you, in your own experience, when this conservative community, let's say Orthodox Jews or Muslim, whatever, it's so close to the public, and in the example of Mormon, for example, where there is abuse, women are abused every single day. So, and they are told, for example, to accept that, as for example, if you see the Old Testament, in the Christianity, Christian Bible, women were not allowed to speak in public. They were allowed to cover their head and so forth. So, if you go down, you see that there were some Christians, even today, in some communities that don't allow the women to speak if there's people visiting. They have to be quiet. They all wait, and then they tell them to obey. I'm the man who takes all the decision. I'm trying to be all over, but my point is, have you observed the abuse of women?
Well, first of all, so let me back up to the first part of your question. So it used to be that there was no Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. Jews were just Jews, right? And it wasn't until really in the 19th century that we started to see the rise of Reform Judaism, first in Germany, right, where we had a very open, pluralistic society, and for the first time Jews could become, really educated and take part and vote and all these other kinds of things they'd never been able to do before. So, and the way Jews had actually reached the upper levels of society before that, because they couldn't really take part, they would just assimilate, right, and eventually become Christian or just convert because, right, if you had to dress a certain way and observe all this stuff and you took a different day off than everybody else, where were you ever going to get anywhere? So we see the rise of Reform Judaism, where Reform Judaism says, look, we need to reform this religion. We have this group of people who are very educated and they can read, and we need to. And one of the things Reform Judaism did was it said we don't want women sitting up at the top and men sitting below during services. That's ridiculous. We want them to sit together. Why not? It should be just like a church, right? And also, most women never learned how to read Hebrew, and so they started printing Bibles in German for them to look at during services, because they could read German, and so why not publish it in a language that they know? So Reform Judaism did a lot to really radically change the face of Judaism, and it said, look, we think that all these things, all these sacred texts, they're inspired and they're nice texts and we really believe in them and they're great, but we don't believe in the rabbinic laws and we're not going to deal with them. We're going to use the ones and reinterpret the ones that we like, the holidays that we like, we keep, the things that we don't like, we don't. The prayer book's not set in stone. We don't agree with a lot of what's in it. We're going to change the words. We're going to make up our new melodies. We're going to do what we want to do. And essentially Reform Judaism did that. And eventually came to the United States. And Reform Jews from Germany came here and, did very well for themselves. And in the early 1900s, we started seeing a huge wave of immigration to the United States from Eastern Europe, from those countries where Jews had been forced to live in what we call the Pale of Settlement. They'd sort of been exiled up into these, Eastern European countries, and life was getting very, very bad for them. They lived in shtetls, or communities that were very closed off from everyone else. They were regularly attacked. And they had very little money. I mean, my grandmother, regularly, would say, "Oh, come on, Grandma, what did your family do?" "Oh, we were dirt farmers." I mean, they just didn't have any money, and they didn't have anything. And so those people came in a great wave of immigration, mostly to the East Coast, in the early 1900s. And when they came, what they were confronted with was a bunch of Reform Jews who were from Germany, who were super well educated, unlike them, who looked very European, unlike them, right? Eastern Europeans and other Europeans, they don't all look the same, and who. These by and large German Reform Jews kind of looked at their poor cousins as kind of like the unwashed masses, kind of like, I'll hold my nose and deal with you kind of thing. And as these people became assimilated into American culture, they did not feel the way Reform Jews felt about totally, these huge reforms that had happened in Judaism. They didn't want services on Sunday. That regular Torah reading days are Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, and they didn't want service. They're used to Saturday is the Sabbath day. They did not feel comfortable in all cases just wearing whatever you wanted to wear, the latest style of the day. They wanted traditional dress, or they didn't feel like they were going to give up all of these food dietary laws. They didn't want to necessarily have women and men sit together during services. They weren't ready to do that. And because of that, conservative Judaism was born. It is also very liberal. It says that we are going to deal with the rabbis as serious interlocutors, these ancient rabbinic writings of the Talmud, the Mishnah, these laws, but we think they need to be reframed into this modern day context. And so we will try and keep those things that work, and the things that don't ostensibly work, we will see if we can reinterpret into making them work. We're not just going to throw everything out. We don't agree with that. And so they were trying to conserve the law, but update the religion, and that's how they got the name conservative. So no conservative Jews dress the way ultra-Orthodox dress. No?
Yeah, that's the first part. You did a great job. The second part now is about, this is things we observe in either in Toronto, that I'm Canadian from Toronto, even if I'm African, lived there for 80 years. There's these people of different religion who come, like Islam and so forth. I was very sad. We were in the subway, and there's this guy with his wife. His wife was trying to even look her eyes in another guy who was sitting next. He pushed her, and in the next stop, when they were stopping for the subway and getting in the bus so that they can go, he was holding her like, I just was afraid that she's going to be beat up when she gets home. So my question is, to which extent that the religion is used as oppressive toward women?
I mean, I think that Orthodox Judaism didn't set out to be oppressive towards women, but I think it's incredibly oppressive. Not modern Orthodoxy. I mean, modern Orthodoxy seems to be okay to me. But yes, this sounds like ultra-Orthodox. And, you know, I study religion. I should not pass judgment. But yeah, I think it's incredibly oppressive. I think it's incredibly oppressive to, I mean, look at what happened to my friend who is gay. You know, yeah.
So do you address those issues in the Jewish community? About women?
Well, they're not, I mean, the ultra-Orthodox don't consider, I mean, they might consider me Jewish if we're in a lineup for a gas chamber, right? They might consider me Jewish because they want to bring me in and make me like them, right? But they certainly don't consider or approve or condone of anything that would come out of my mouth, and would have no interest in listening to me, and I leave them alone and they leave me alone. I mean, most of them already have a problem with the fact I work outside the home. I study the Bible as a pure academic. Do I believe that's the Word of God? I can tell you right now, no. Do I think it's an inspired book? Yeah, in some cases I do. I studied it because I have an academic interest in it, right? They're not interested in the academic study of the Bible. They think I'm crazy, right? Or that I'm destroying their religion somehow, or that I'm leading their children astray, or that I'm, right? So I'm not in a dialogue with them, you know. When I lived in Israel, you know, there was an ultra-Orthodox guy that lived upstairs from me. That was a 2-bedroom apartment. He had like 8 children in that apartment. His son was already taken out of that apartment. When his kids become teenagers, you know, they defy his authority, and he beat them. He beats his son within an inch of his life. His son was, you know, social services was called, his son was taken away. Then when I was there, that had happened before I ever got there. I never knew about it until the event with his daughter. And he beat his daughter. Why? She wanted to talk on the phone. Wow. You know, and what was done in the community, you know, I hear this screaming. I run next door. There's a professor at Hebrew University who lives next door to me. I grab him. I send him upstairs. You know, the daughter was taken out to go, you know, stay at some friend's house. I mean, everyone on the street could hear it. It was like they were screaming and yelling, and it was terrifying. And, you know, is that a totally closed community? I'm going to bet so. And I would bet my bottom dollar on it. The only, you know, and even my next door neighbor was, you know, said to me, well, you know, children are incredibly resilient. They'll figure it out. And I'm like, The next day, I called my landlady. She's a completely secular person. I had her call the police. I wanted to make sure there's you know, I don't care. I wanted to make, they wouldn't know it was me. She reported it. It's her apartment. You know, and I'm sure that child was removed for good, right? I mean, they put in the social service stuff, you know. But yeah, are they you know.
I really appreciate that you did that, because I know even in human services, we want to respect people, culture, religion, and everything. But when it comes to abuse, and you did a good thing.
Right, and I guess that's my message to you also, right? I mean, the same goes, I mean, if it's illegal, it's illegal. I mean, it's assault.
Well, we're just talking about kind of like more extreme cases and how the Orthodox community can be really close, but isn't there a place near Jerusalem called 100 Gates or something, which is known for being an extremely Orthodox community?
Mea Shearim. You know,
Well,
Mea Shearim. Okay, go ahead.
Well,
I'll let you
I don't
out.
know if this is true or not, but I heard that like one time the police were called in there for some reason, and it was on Shabbat when you're not supposed to be driving a car, and the police car went to go drive through the town, and they stoned the car until the car broke because.
Yeah, they would do it to you.
Yeah.
If you drove through there. And they have big signs up that say that you shouldn't drive through there.
They put tire, what are those things called that break your tires so the cars can't drive through there?
Well, they'll do all kinds of things.
But
I
just
mean,
as far as like services go, like if you were, a human services, like child protection service worker in Israel, something, and you got called to go to that community on Shabbat and you drove through, that would be a
well, you
potential.
wouldn't. You would walk,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's a big sign up in English that says, don't drive through here. But, and I always wonder if that story is like, real or not. I mean, the scary thing is that, so the bus from Hebrew University to Rehavia, the community that I lived in, went right through the Mea Shearim. And, you go to Hebrew University, it's summertime. It's like almost 100 degrees outside. Everybody's wearing like spaghetti strap tops or, sleeveless tops and shorts and short skirts. And the bus broke down. The bus broke down. We had to get off the bus. I'm standing there with these young girls who are, they're all like on junior year abroad. They're you, essentially, in 100-degree weather. And we're standing in the middle of Mea Shearim. I was freaking out for them. I felt like their mother, And in Israel regularly, I would wear pants. I would never wear shorts unless I knew I was going out to an archaeological site, right? And I do a lot of work in archaeology, so of course I wear shorts then. But I always have pants. I dress like a secular Israeli, but I'm covered up. And I always have, even if I have a sleeveless top, I have a sweater where, like that. Like I have shirts like this. Why? Because somehow, I don't know why, your elbows are very sexy to Orthodox people. You have to have your elbows covered. And, so I had a sweater I put on right away. But I was worried for these girls, because not necessarily that I thought people would throw stones, but there were women who started looking out their windows and screaming at those girls. And I screamed back. The bus broke down.
Good job.
But I was like, but what was I going to do if, and they didn't care that the bus broke down. We're in their neighborhood. You know what I mean? So you can say good job, but anthropologically, I'm in the wrong. We're in the wrong. We shouldn't be in that neighborhood. I would strongly suggest that when you go to the Middle East, these are Muslim countries, Jewish countries, whatever, you're in those places, you dress according to their standard. I don't go into the old city, and it's not just an issue of Jews, it's an issue of Muslims. They want you to be covered up. And it's not my place, it's not my community, it's not my place. But I do this out of respect. That's how they live.
For example, if I'm from Congo and there was a president where if a teenagers a lady wears a pen, they will send police and they will hit those ladies so bad. But there were people, young people, some like me, some college people who stood up to that oppressive system and said, you can't separate what you believe in with the liberty of the people.
Right.
And that was abolished, and women are free. They can dress whatever they want.
But then you have a situation where you have women who want to wear their traditional hair covering, Muslim women who want to wear their hair covered, Orthodox women. We have a law in Oregon up until very recently that was illegal in the classroom.
That's bad then.
But do you see what I mean?
Yes.
It's hard to, what's oppression, what's abuse? So, it comes down to, right, if it breaks the law, then there's a problem in my mind, right? But those women, they're free to yell. There's freedom of speech in Israel, and everybody yells, and I yelled back. It wasn't a big deal. It would have been scary if they had started throwing stones. Like, that would have been scary. And there are communities in New York like that. You drive through certain communities in New York, you're going to be met with the same problem. But they're very well positioned, well signed. But let's get back to, human services. I don't think you're going to come in contact with that many Orthodox. It's really knowing sort of, somebody walks into you or you're working with somebody and all of a sudden now, maybe they're new to the community and you're working with them. And it's the awareness of, wow, it's September, and it occurs to you, oh, I wonder if those high holy days are coming around. I wonder if that person has made a connection, has somewhere to go. Where it might occur to you right away to say to somebody, wow, have you connected with your church? Have you, are you into a church? Have you connected? Now you might think to yourself, oh, maybe they're Jewish. Maybe I should ask them whether they want to connect with a synagogue and help facilitate that.
Could you give us a few of the dates or the time periods when, like, Yom Kippur and Passover and Rosh Hashanah occur? Because in the readings I didn't actually hear like dates, or maybe it's
There's a table in the readings, I think.
Is there?
Yeah. But essentially Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur occur around, September, so middle of September to end of September. It's on a different calendar. So Jews have this saying where we always say the holidays are either early or late because they're either, they change. So they're either like middle September or late September, right? So they're either early or late. And that'll set for the whole year, right? So that's when the New Year is, and the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, also occurs. Then it's 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. And then you get into a whole cluster of holidays that happen all together, which are not like, I shouldn't say this, the rabbi will say they're major holidays, and for him they are. But for the rest of us, we keep teaching on those days. So there's Simchat Torah in there, and there's there's all these other holidays. The next really big holiday where you could see a real flare-up in stuff happening for people, in my mind, would be around Passover, right? Well, you could see one around Hanukkah in the States, right? Because that's kind of a big holiday, but it's a happy holiday. Passover is a holiday that, because it has this big Seder, this big service and feast that happens within the home, and it lasts for 8 days. People eat unleavened bread, this kind of stuff. For people who are having mental problems or having family issues, I think the family holidays, things you celebrate as a family, can really be hot buttons. It's the time of year when I see, and when I see people who wouldn't otherwise identify as being Jewish or care about being Jewish, all of a sudden they want a place to go, and they want a place to go, and they want it to be like whatever their mother had, even if they hate their mother, want it to be like whatever their mother did. So that kind of stuff, and I think that you can start to see that in sort of what happens to people surrounding like depression and those kinds of things. So all Jewish holidays are about, either eating or not eating, right? So, but those are really the biggies. In the United States, Hanukkah is still a biggie. That's right around Christmas every year. Again, either early or late, Purim is a really big holiday in Israel. It's not as big a holiday here. It's a very fun holiday. Big drinking holiday. Jews are supposed to get so drunk that when they go to the synagogue and they hear the scroll of Esther read, you can't tell the difference between the name of Mordecai and the name of Haman. That's a law. You're supposed to get that drunk, right? So, isn't that crazy? Yeah.
So how is it that you say that there is no doctrine, but yet I guess I'm confused because I'm hearing about like the Ten Commandments and the Torah and the Tanakh, or I'm saying that wrong. I don't understand how those aren't considered doctrines, or those aren't guiding principles to the religion.
They're not guiding principles. They're laws. They're discrete laws, right? The Ten Commandments are laws. Right? And in fact, we call those apodictic laws. They are not if-then laws. They're just decrees. Do not murder. By the way, it doesn't say do not kill. It says do not murder. Do not steal. Do not covet your neighbor's property, right? And then you have all these casuistic laws. If this happens, then this happens. If your ox falls down on your neighbor's property and dies, right? What do you do? And those laws, in order to follow them, need to be interpreted, right? Because otherwise, They're bizarre in today's life. In anybody, in like 200 years ago, they were bizarre. 1,000 years ago, they were bizarre. So that's different than what we call doctrines, right? When you go to take communion, or for the first time, or even if you're baptized, right, as an adult, right, you have to say that you believe certain things, and Jews don't have that. They don't have a set of principles that they all agree on. These are the principles we all agree on.
Do different subgroups have those? Like if most of our clients are going to be, let's say, Reformed Jews?
Oh, especially Reformed Jews wouldn't have them. No.
So then as a human services professional, to navigate the interaction, we don't want to necessarily separate them from their humanity of just, we're all humans. We also want to honor and respect their religious and their cultural background. Do you have tips about how to navigate that conversation of wanting to invite,
yes,
talking about how
the
best
tip I can give you is to recognize that you're not, to be very aware of what religion you are, and even if you're not a religion, you don't have a specific religion that you adhere to, that you check yourself, right? That you're in constant check, that you're authentic to who you are without doing that automatic judging of someone else, right? So in your situation, I would say, the only time where I'm judging somebody is when I think someone else's life
is being threatened.
Yeah. And other than that, certainly in the Middle East, what I try and do and ascribe to, when I walk the streets in Tunis, although there are women who dress however they dress, there's a whole group of Berbers there, and they dress extremely conservatively, and so did I. And I wore long skirts and long sleeves, and and I was covered. Because it's out of respect. So I would say check at the door, right? Wow, what are my motivations here? When I hear Jew, do I think of somebody who's really rich, and therefore they don't really need my help? Do I think of a Christ killer, no matter what my pastor might have said to me? Or does my pastor say that? Is that what are they all Pharisees, right? Because that's what we read about in the New Testament, right? I would say check at the door, what it is that goes through your mind, and then really analyze that, really look at that. That's where I could not do your job. I know that about myself. I know that.
Because not that you have a hard time recognizing it, but you have a hard time putting it aside. Because recognizing it's one step, and then putting it aside is a whole nother step.
Yeah, I can see, I know my prejudices, but very hard for me. And I can do it with others. It's with my own that I don't do it well. Do you know what I'm saying? That's where it would be very hard for me. But that's the only advice I can really give you. I don't think I have any other advice.
Yeah. What you say is true, that a sense of respect of religion, like you go in Tunisia or whatever people wearing and so forth. Even when we speak about abuses and so forth, we speak it in the United States perspective. But if you go in other countries where they have traditions that are so hard, how do you fight the whole country? Maybe you can come back and speak that I went to that country, maybe in human rights journal and so forth. But if it's the US, it's a country where everyone come and they think like they are free to express themselves. And even in that case, like you said, if there is a religion that is peaceful, and even if those women choose to wear that, is their choice. So the case I was asking you is that if that you see that lady, every time she sees you, she's bruised, for example. And maybe the neighbor said that she get beat up and so forth. And some ladies believe that they deserve to be punished, and they don't report that. In that case, what we have nothing to do if she doesn't want to report that. So
we would still report it.
If she
I would still report it, just like I would.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah.
So she comes in your office and then she's bruised all the time, and then she doesn't choose to say anything, and everything is okay with you, yes.
People have, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like clients, like they have the right to refuse your services unless they're court mandated that, you know, we're, okay, well, you're not providing a safe environment for your child, so we're going to take custody of your child. It's up to them to access the services that we're giving them. If they refuse to follow that, then they are giving up their child because they are refusing to change their behavior or change the environment then to make it safe for their child. So I guess like what I'm trying to say is people can refuse their services. It's just the consequences that they're going to have to suffer depending on what organization you're with. DHS, lawfully, we will take your child until you can provide a safe environment and until you can do what is mandated by a court to do.
What about if she doesn't have a child?
If she doesn't have a child, then she can refuse the services.
Well, she's not at risk. I thought that unfortunately, domestic violence is not, you don't have to mandatory report it, is that correct?
It's only children.
It's just children, elderly, and the mentally disabled.
Yeah, the last question I was going to ask you, is it any service in the community like helping the poor and people who are disadvantaged in the Jewish?
Yes. And just about every Jewish community will have such a person through their Jewish Federation. And Jewish Federation is usually a coming together of all the Jewish groups, and this is a place where the Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, it doesn't matter. It will all be the same people in the Jewish community giving money to the Jewish Federation in order to hire. Sometimes they'll have a whole series of services connected to the Jewish Federation. In our case, Eugene is very small, has very small number of Jews, but we still, through the Jewish Federation, we have a social worker. Yeah. Her name's Deb Wyman, in case you ever need to know. And she's a lovely person.
That would be the representative in Eugene, Deb Wyman.
Deb Wyman, yeah. She's a social worker who works. I had suggested that actually she be the one who come in and talk to you. But I'm not sure what happened with that. I mean, she's pretty busy, as you can imagine. But, you know, because we don't have the funds to, you know, support a lot of people. But, you know, in Los Angeles, there's an entire legal defense fund that's manned by Jews through the Jewish Federation, and while they defend lots of other people, their primary, you know, objective is in defending Jews who can't afford it. Yeah, so there's and I mean that's just one example. I mean there's a ton of stuff like that. I mean in Orange County in the 80s, there was an entire movement of, you know, volunteers organized to help people who were dying of AIDS. I mean, there, you know, scores of people were dying of AIDS and, you know, needed help. And so,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And you know, what's amazing to me is that Jews actually don't stop at just Jews. I mean, if you start looking at other organizations, you know, they're big givers. And it's sort of an unfortunate thing, I think, that's happened in this country. We were talking about this. You know, one of the things that I've noticed through the Bush years is that more and more of our social services are coming through just religious organizations. And that's really tough because that means that, you know, and certainly I would say the vast number of those are Christian organizations, which is all well and fine. But, you know, Jews are not going to want to go and seek help at some evangelical organization. They have long histories of being, you know, proselyte. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have tried to proselytize me and get me to convert to the thing. I'm like, you can't be serious, you know, like why? And so, you know, that's really a problem. And I assume that, you know, we're going to see with more and more Muslims coming into the country, we're going to see they're going to have the same problem, you know. So these other groups, these other religious groups have really had to form their own social service agencies.
I had a question, but it's, why do you think that there are more religious organizations offering social services through, I guess, the time of the Bush administration? Why do you, are you comparing that to secular human service organizations? Like, why do you think that is?
Well, I think there was an agenda of deeply cutting secular service and undermining it. I think there's been a big rise in the power of the Christian right. I think people figured out that you know, they could get a lot of adherence by helping people, which I think is a good. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think that's a good thing. But I think there's been a big fall off in this country of, secularity and helping people who are, truly the other, and without having any other thing at stake. And I think that's very sad. And I'm not sure why that happened during the Bush. I mean, I just noticed that it did. Yeah, of course I have an opinion about why it happened, but I don't think it's based in any reality. I mean, I think it's just, there's all kinds of things that have happened recently that I think may not be so good for the country. And I'm hoping that that swings back. I mean, I'm actually hoping that part of what will happen is of us taking in a large number of Iraqi refugees who come really from a very different place, who we are really responsible for and that we need to help, will bring out the best in us. And will get us, at least from a social service standpoint, to really find a way to help these people without any agenda, without trying to change them in any way, but to help them keep their cultural life intact without it being oppressive, right, or unduly oppressive, without it being violent or unduly oppressive, but allow them to be who they are in our country, because we really changed the face of Iraq, and these people really need a place where they can be at home and restart their lives. And I like to think that we're the land of the free, right? And that we're one of the few places in the world where we really care for and really support each other. And I'm really in awe of you guys, because I think that you for as much as I believe in this prophetic mission of helping the most needy in society, you guys are actually getting ready to go out there and do it every day. And to me, that's a remarkable thing. And that's what higher education is all about. I mean, you're helping Jews attain that tikkun olam of repairing the world. And that's something. I mean, and it's something. And I'm pretty much in awe of you guys. And I know we're wrapping up now, but this has been a wonderful experience for me, and I have to say that I'm very busy now with this directorship. But if you have more questions and you want to come see me during office hours, it's very hard for me to schedule a lot of stuff because I have so many other things going on. But during office hours, and talk more, my door's open, and I'm happy to meet with you. So thank you.
Yeah, I would like just to tell you that that was exciting. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And I didn't get to say how phenomenal I think it is that Carrie got this thing rolling and has strong-armed all of us into doing it.